Rain hammered the windshield like 1,000 impatient fingers. A sleek black car crept up to the towering gates of Silverwood Estate, its headlights glinting off the iron bars that guarded the wealth within. Inside the car sat David Reed, his eyes heavy from a 14-hour flight, but alive with quiet pride. This was the night he would finally arrive home, the house he'd dreamed of, worked for, and purchased with his own name on the deed. But as the gate loomed closer, so did something else. A test, one he never saw coming. The security guard stepped out of the booth, rain streaking across his uniform. His name tag read Cole. He eyed the BMW as though it were an intruder rather than a resident's car. "Deliveries go around the back," Cole barked, slamming his palm against the hood. David lowered his window, rain misting his face. "I'm not a delivery driver," he said calmly. "I'm David Reed, new owner of 41 Elm Crest." Cole's lip twitched into a smirk. "Sure you are. And I'm the mayor of Silverwood." He pulled his coat aside to flash his badge as if authority could rewrite ownership. "Turn around." Service roads behind the hill. David inhaled slowly. His voice stayed even. "I think there's been a mistake." But there was no mistaking the look in Cole's eyes, the one that said, "You don't belong here." A second guard appeared, radio in hand. Marcus Hale, the night supervisor. He didn't greet David, he didn't ask questions. He simply stood beside Cole and stared. David held out his ID and property documents, laminated and dry inside a protective sleeve. "You can verify everything right now," he offered. Marcus gave the papers a glance that lasted less than a heartbeat before handing them back. These could be printed by anyone. Behind them, another car rolled up, a white couple in a silver Lexus. Cole waved them through with a friendly nod. No ID check, no hesitation. David noticed. He said quietly, "You didn't ask them for proof." Marcus's tone sharpened. "They're longtime residents. We recognize who belongs here." That sentence hung in the air, heavier than the rain. David's jaw tightened. He'd built companies on data and discipline, not emotion. But something about the word belong stung deeper than any insult. He forced a measured nod. "Understood." "Good," Marcus said. "Now please move your vehicle." David didn't argue. He reversed slowly, his wipers beating rhythm against the storm. Behind the gate, the mansion lights shimmered faintly in the distance, where the home he couldn't enter. As he parked on the public street, thunder rolled overhead, echoing the anger he refused to show. He sat there in silence, drenched in disbelief. 2 hours earlier, he'd been flying home a celebrated CEO. Now he was sitting outside his own property, treated like an intruder. But David Reed wasn't a man who accepted humiliation as an ending. He powered on his dying phone and whispered to himself, "They don't know who they've just turned away." Rain poured harder, thick sheets of water blurring the golden lights beyond the gate. David's car felt like a cage, the hum of the engine drowned by the storm. He exhaled slowly, fingers gripping the steering wheel as the last bit of battery flickered on his phone screen. 5%, one call. That's all he had. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped Vanessa, executive assistant. "Vanessa, it's me," he said, voice low but steady. "I need you to activate company protocol oversight at Silverwood Estate now." "Sir?" she asked, startled. "That's the acquisition we finalized yesterday, correct?" "Yes," he replied. "Send legal and HR, they'll know what to do." The phone died in his hand before she could answer. He stared at the black screen for a moment, then slipped it into his pocket. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. David reached for his briefcase and opened it on the passenger seat. Inside were neatly stacked acquisition documents, stamped and signed less than 24 hours ago. On top, the logo of Centra Security, the very company hired to guard Silverwood Estate. The same company he now owned. Lightning flashed. His reflection stared back at him in the window, soaked suit, eyes burning with resolve. He got out of the car. Rain pelted his shoulders as he walked toward the gate once more. Cole saw him coming and smirked. "Back again?" "Didn't get the hint?" "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," David said, his tone even but sharper than before. "That's me," Marcus replied, stepping from the booth. "And I already told you and come back Monday. Office is closed for the weekend." David tilted his head slightly. "Then you're denying entry to the verified owner of this property without evidence or record?" Cole crossed his arms. "We're protecting the neighborhood from strangers." "Strangers?" David repeated softly. That's interesting. You let 3 cars in since I left, none of them verified. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You've been sitting here watching us? Observing, David corrected. I believe in accountability. Cole laughed under his breath. You're something else, man. Next time just try the delivery entrance. It's more your speed, David said nothing. He simply looked at both men, the quiet of his composure more cutting than any argument. Minutes stretched. Finally, Marcus sighed and waved toward the booth. You've got 5 minutes to make a call, then you're leaving. Inside the cramped office, the air smelled of stale coffee and wet fabric. A small heater buzzed near the wall, barely cutting through the cold. David stood on the mat, water dripping from his coat. They didn't offer him a towel. Marcus picked up the landline, dialed a number, waited 2 seconds, and hung up. No answer. Guess you'll have to come back Monday. David studied the silent phone. You didn't wait long enough for a ring. That's not your concern, Marcus snapped. From a desk in the corner, a younger guard, his badge read Eli, spoke softly. We could check the resident database, sir. It should show if— Eli. Marcus cut him off sharply. Back to your station. David turned to the young man. Thank you. I appreciate your effort. Eli hesitated, eyes flicking between his supervisor and David. There was a flicker of conscience there, small but real. Marcus grabbed a form from his clipboard and slid it across the desk. Sign this acknowledgement of denial before you go. Standard procedure. David glanced at it. A clause at the bottom caught his eye. A waiver forfeiting his right to file complaints against Centra Security. He set the pen down. No. Then we'll log this as a trespassing attempt, Cole said coldly. License plates already recorded. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. David finally spoke, each word deliberate. I'd like the names of everyone involved in this incident. Cole snorted. Write it down yourself. He tore off a scrap of paper, scribbled something illegible, and slid it across the table. Marcus added his name, spelling it wrong on purpose. David folded the paper neatly, tucked it into his pocket, and said quietly, Thank you for your cooperation. They laughed as he stepped out into the rain. They didn't realize the storm that had just begun had nothing to do with the weather. In his car, he changed into a dry shirt from his luggage, opened his tablet, and scrolled through internal company files. His fingers stopped on one name, Centra Security Division, North Region. A document opened. Complaints of discrimination filed across multiple sites, marked resolved with no action taken. He read every line, his expression unreadable. He looked out through the rain-blurred window at the same gate that refused him entry. His eyes were calm now, almost serene. 2 hours, he murmured. That's all it will take, and he was right, because in 2 hours, everyone who had mocked him at that gate would be standing in his mansion, waiting for the man they thought they had denied, and realizing too late who he truly was. The storm outside began to ease, but the storm inside Silverwood had only begun. The rain had slowed to a steady whisper by the time a black SUV turned into Silverwood's main drive. Its headlights cut through the mist like searchlights, and 2 figures stepped out, Maya from legal and Jonas from HR. Both were dressed in crisp suits, their umbrellas snapping open as they hurried toward the security booth. Cole leaned lazily against the doorframe, unimpressed. Evening. You folks lost? Maya met his gaze without blinking. We're here on behalf of the owner of this estate. We need access to your security logs and surveillance footage immediately. Marcus frowned. That's not possible without corporate clearance. You have it, Jonas said simply, pulling a document from his briefcase. The paper bore the signature and seal of Reed Industries. Centra Security was acquired by our parent company yesterday, which means your clearance now falls under us. The color drained slightly from Marcus's face. He glanced at Cole, whose smirk faltered. Eli, sitting at the monitoring desk, straightened nervously. I can pull the footage, he offered. Do it, Maya said. Her voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of authority. Within seconds, the monitor came alive with playback. The moment David Reed arrived, his polite tone, his ID presented, the guard's dismissive laughter, and the white couple waved through without question. The recording didn't lie. Maya crossed her arms as the sound of Cole's voice filled the booth. Maybe try the delivery entrance next time. Jonas shook his head slowly. This will not end well for you. Marcus tried to recover his composure. We were following standard verification protocol. Maya turned to him. So your protocol involves admitting known residents without ID while refusing entry to a verified homeowner with documentation? That's not what I said, Marcus muttered. Eli spoke again, hesitant but clear. After you went outside, I checked the resident database. Mr. Reed's name is there, listed as the owner of 41 Elm Crest. It even says he's the CEO of Reed Industries. Cole blinked. You what? Marcus's voice turned sharp. That's insubordination, Eli. You don't touch the system without authorization. Maya made a note on her tablet. Thank you, Eli. You've just verified what we needed. A tense silence filled the booth. The phone rang, shrill and urgent. Marcus grabbed it instinctively. On the other end, a voice barked through the receiver, words spilling out so fast he barely processed them. His expression shifted from irritation to dread. He hung up slowly, turning pale. Everyone needs to report to the main house immediately, Cole frowned. What for? Marcus swallowed hard. That call was from corporate. Mr. Reed wants to see us. For the first time that night, none of them spoke. They simply looked at each other, realizing what it meant. By the time they trudged up the long stone walkway to the mansion, their uniforms were soaked and heavy, rainwater dripping from their sleeves. The grand double doors opened before they could knock. Inside stood Patricia, regional manager for Centra Security. Her expression was all business. Gentlemen, she said, her tone clipped. You'll follow me to the conference room. Now. The guards entered a space that looked more like a boardroom than a living area. Marble floors, glass walls, and a long mahogany table shining under chandelier light. A massive screen on the far wall displayed the Centra Security logo, slowly fading into the emblem of Reed Industries. Marcus shifted uneasily. What's this about? The door opened behind them. They turned and froze. David Reed walked in, dry, composed, wearing a fresh tailored suit and an unmistakable badge on his lapel. Chief Executive Officer. He moved to the head of the table with the ease of a man who owned both the room and their futures. For those who didn't bother to check earlier, he said evenly, I'm David Reed, CEO of Reed Industries, and as of yesterday, your employer. The silence was absolute. Even the hum of the AC seemed to stop. Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came. Cole's confidence crumbled, his smirk gone. Eli looked down, uneasy but relieved. David continued, I arrived home this evening after a long international flight. Instead of being welcomed, I was interrogated, insulted, and denied entry to my own property. I was told to use a delivery entrance. He paused, eyes moving slowly across the faces in front of him. Tell me, how exactly does your definition of security justify discrimination? No one answered. Maya stepped forward, placing printed stills from the security footage on the table. Every interaction has been documented, she said. Every violation of protocol. Every instance of selective enforcement. David nodded slightly. Mr. Cole, Mr. Hale, you're both terminated effective immediately. Marcus stammered. You can't just... I can, David interrupted calmly. And I have. The rest of your team will undergo retraining. Those who value integrity will stay. Those who don't, won't. Patricia kept her voice firm but respectful. New protocols will take effect tomorrow morning. This isn't just disciplinary, it's structural. David turned to Eli. You verified my name even when told not to. That took courage. Expect a call from Patricia tomorrow. Eli nodded wordlessly, unsure whether to thank him or apologize. David looked at the others one last time. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about rebuilding something that should have never been broken in the first place. The guards lowered their eyes as he stood and buttoned his jacket. Dismissed, he said quietly. When the room emptied, Patricia lingered. What now? She asked. David looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Now, he said, we fix the system that let this happen. Not just here. Everywhere. And somewhere deep inside that mansion, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, every guard who had laughed at him realized the storm was far from over. The next morning dawned gray and silent over the city, but inside Reed Industries headquarters the air pulsed with tension. A hastily called emergency meeting filled the boardroom. Directors, legal teams, communications heads all waiting for David Reed to enter. When he finally did, the room fell still. He looked rested, but there was a quiet fire behind his calm. He didn't sit. He walked straight to the digital screen at the end of the long table, where security footage from the night before waited on pause. He pressed play. The sound of rain filled the room again. The words of the guards echoed through the speakers. Maybe try the delivery entrance next time. The sneer in Cole's voice made several executives shift uncomfortably. When the video ended, David turned to face them. That, he said evenly, is what happens when systems go unchecked. One incident, one gate, one assumption. But this is not about a single night. It's about a pattern. Maya, seated near the end of the table, opened her tablet. We've already reviewed dozens of complaints under Centra Security. Most were closed without investigation. The language in those reports is almost identical. Visitor confusion, security misunderstanding. Each time, the subject happened to be a person of color. A murmur rippled across the table. Jonas added, and the same supervisor's name appears in most of those reports, Marcus Hale. He was transferred between properties after each complaint rather than disciplined. David nodded. Exactly. Moving a problem doesn't solve it. It spreads it. He tapped the screen again. New slides appeared, charts, reports, testimonials. The faces on the screen weren't actors or abstractions. They were real people, employees, residents, families who'd written letters that no one had ever read. For years, David continued, this company, and others like it, have defended bad practices as protocol. We told ourselves bias wasn't in our systems. It was, we just didn't look closely enough. An older board member cleared his throat. With respect, David, this was an isolated security matter. It doesn't warrant a public campaign. Handling it internally would minimize exposure. David looked at him without blinking. Minimize exposure to what? The truth? No one answered. He turned back to the screen. We're going to face this head on. Starting today, Centra Security's leadership will be replaced. A full audit will review every site, every supervisor, every complaint. And we're implementing a new verification system that removes subjective judgment from access control. Another director frowned. That's ambitious. Costly too. David's tone didn't change. The cost of injustice is higher. The room fell silent again. Maya's voice broke the quiet. We'll need to coordinate with property management partners. The problem doesn't end at Centra. It extends into the communities they serve. David nodded. That's why this won't be a press statement. It'll be a blueprint. He stepped away from the table, glancing toward the window where the skyline was slowly clearing after the storm. What happened at that gate isn't my story alone. It's a mirror. We can pretend it doesn't exist, or we can rebuild the frame. Across town, Marcus and Cole sat in a dimly lit law office, waiting for their attorney. The blinds were half drawn, dust dancing in the slivers of light. Marcus drummed his fingers on the table, nervous but trying to mask it. Their lawyer, Ray Delgado, entered with a stack of papers. So, he said, sitting down, you're claiming wrongful termination? Cole leaned forward. We were following orders. There was nothing racist about it. He didn't have clearance. Delgado opened the incident report and sighed. He had the deed ID and was on your system as the property owner. Meanwhile, you waved through multiple white residents without verification. Marcus stiffened. We recognized them. Did your training manual say that recognition equals exemption? Delgado asked quietly. Neither answered. Delgado closed the folder. If you file this complaint, it'll go public. The evidence against you is overwhelming. My advice, take the termination and walk away. Cole's jaw tightened. We're not just walking away. Delgado studied him, then said, you might wish you had. Back at Reed Industries, the communications team was drafting a statement. But David didn't want a statement. He wanted action. He met again with Patricia, who looked uneasy. The audit found something worse, she said, placing a report on the table. Complaints weren't just ignored. They were reclassified to avoid being counted in discrimination statistics. It's systemic, David nodded slowly. Then we rebuild the system. Patricia hesitated. And Eli? He's being promoted, David replied. Someone like him deserves to help shape what comes next. He paused, his tone softening just slightly. People like Marcus and Cole, they'll try to frame this as punishment. But it's not. It's consequence. Patricia gave a small nod. So what now? David looked at her. Now we make sure no one else has to stand in the rain explaining they belong in a place they already own. Outside, the clouds finally broke. Sunlight spilled across the city, catching the mirrored towers of Reed Industries. But for David, the reflection in that glass wasn't pride. It was responsibility. He knew the storm had passed for him, but it was just beginning for everyone who had looked the other way. 3 months later, the headlines were everywhere. Former guards sue Reed Industries. Wrongful termination or racial reckoning. The world hadn't forgotten the storm at Silverwood, and now Marcus Hale and Cole were trying to turn it into their redemption. Their case had reached arbitration, a final attempt to salvage their reputations. The hearing room felt more like a courtroom than a conference hall. Wood-paneled walls, a long elevated bench, and 3 arbitrators seated above everyone else. Cameras weren't allowed, but journalists waited outside, their questions already sharpened. Marcus sat stiffly beside his lawyer, Ray Delgado. Cole slouched next to him, still defiant, though the sweat on his collar betrayed nerves. Across the room, Maya represented Reed Industries, calm, focused, and unreadable. The lead arbitrator, a retired judge named Amara Owens, looked over her glasses. We are here to address the complaint of wrongful termination filed by Marcus Hale and Cole Turner against Centra Security, a subsidiary of Reed Industries. Counsel, you may proceed. Delgado stood. My clients were terminated unfairly. They followed established company practices never formally documented but long accepted. They were scapegoated to protect the corporation's image. Maya waited until he finished, then stood. What Mr. Delgado calls long accepted is precisely the problem. Discrimination doesn't stop being wrong just because it's familiar. Judge Owens nodded. Proceed with witness testimony. Marcus was first. He clasped his hands as if in prayer, voice tight with rehearsed control. I've worked in security for 15 years. We're trained to be vigilant. That night we had multiple theft alerts. I did my job. Maya's tone stayed polite. Did your job include refusing a resident entry while admitting others without verification? We recognize them, Marcus replied. So recognition is your metric for access. He hesitated. It's part of situational awareness. Was it part of written protocol? No, but then what was it? Marcus faltered. Judgment. Maya let the silence stretch before replying. Judgment is a powerful thing when it's wrong. Next came Cole. He leaned forward, trying to project confidence. We didn't know who he was. He could have been anyone. We were keeping the community safe. Did he tell you who he was? Maya asked. Yes, but anyone can say they're the owner. So you didn't verify? Couldn't. System access is limited to supervisors. Then why did you allow 3 cars through that same gate without verification? Cole blinked. We knew them. Maya's voice was quiet but precise. You knew their faces, not their credentials, so the only difference between them and Mr. Reed was appearance. Delgado objected, but Judge Owens overruled him. The truth was too plain to hide. During recess, Marcus leaned toward Delgado. She's twisting everything. Delgado sighed. No, Marcus. She's quoting you. When the session resumed, Maya called her witness, Eli Navarro, now wearing a new badge, Security Operations Manager, Reed Industries. He spoke softly but firmly. The night Mr. Reed arrived, he showed ID and property documents. I saw them myself. I suggested checking the database, but Mr. Hale stopped me. After they left, I checked anyway. His name was there, listed as the new owner and CEO. I didn't report it because I feared retaliation. Delgado frowned. You have any proof of that database entry? Yes, Eli said, holding up printed screenshots. Time-stamped, before the incident report was filed. Then Maya produced her final piece of evidence. Emails recovered from Marcus's Centra account. They contained phrases like, use extra scrutiny where it's warranted and know who belongs. Judge Owens read them silently before lifting her gaze. Mr. Hale explained these directives. They were just security reminders, Marcus said quickly. Context matters. Context, the judge repeated, like the part where you never defined what belongs means. The tension cracked something in the air. For the first time, Marcus had no answer. When testimony ended, the panel recessed for deliberation. They were gone less than half an hour. Judge Owens returned, her tone clipped but final. The panel finds the terminations justified. The evidence demonstrates consistent misuse of discretion discriminatory conduct, and suppression of complaints. Claims for damages are denied. Further, the panel recommends review of both claimants' state security licenses. The gavel struck once. Outside, cameras flashed as doors opened. Marcus shoved past the reporters, silent, but Cole couldn't resist one last mutter. They needed villains. Black and white. Simple story for the press. That one sentence would haunt him. Recorded by multiple microphones, it aired within hours. The backlash was swift and merciless. Meanwhile, inside Reed Industries, David watched the footage of the arbitration ruling with quiet satisfaction. There was no triumph in his eyes, just clarity. Patricia entered the room. "It's over," she said softly. David shook his head. "No, this was never about two men losing their jobs. It's about the system that trained them to believe what they did was normal." He turned toward her. "Let's finish what we started." That night, he signed a company-wide directive establishing a new division, Office of Equal Integrity, tasked with overseeing all corporate and security policies across Reed Industries Holdings. Patricia would lead it. Eli would assist. David leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute. "The gate was never the problem," he said quietly. "It was the people deciding who could pass through it." Outside his office window, city lights stretched like constellations. Somewhere out there, someone else was still standing in the rain, waiting for a gate to open. He intended to make sure the next one did. 1 year later, sunlight washed across Silverwood Estate, glinting off the gates that had once stayed locked against their own owner. The air smelled of cut grass and new beginnings. Inside the mansion, laughter and quiet conversation filled the rooms. Guests in elegant attire moved between the terraces, where tables gleamed under strings of warm light. It was a celebration, a delayed housewarming, but more than that, a symbol. David Reed stood by the window for a moment, watching people arrive. The same driveway that had once felt like a border now felt like home. Patricia approached, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "You should join them," she said gently. "In a moment," he replied. "I'm just remembering how this place looked the first night I came here. All I saw then was rain and a closed gate." She smiled softly. "And now that gate's open? For everyone." Outside on the lawn, a banner read Equity and Security Summit, hosted by Reed Industries. What had started as one man's humiliation had become a movement. Dozens of companies had adopted the new verification protocols, and several state agencies had made them a standard. Eli, once the quiet young guard, now led a national training program teaching security teams how to distinguish vigilance from bias. Maya and Jonas mingled nearby, both still part of David's leadership circle. Conversations buzzed about how the reforms had not only restored public trust, but improved performance across every division. Security incidents down 40%, someone said. Resident satisfaction at record highs. David finally stepped outside, greeted with applause. It wasn't for him personally. It was for what had changed because he refused to walk away that night. He began speaking without a microphone. The crowd hushed naturally. "A year ago, I stood outside those gates and was told I didn't belong," he said. "I could have left. I could have blamed 2 guards and moved on. But that would have solved nothing. Because the truth is, those 2 men weren't the disease, they were symptoms of something bigger." He looked around the crowd. "We built systems that rewarded assumption instead of understanding. We called them efficient. We called them standard. But they were neither." A light wind rippled across the grass as he continued. "When we redesigned our protocols, we didn't just fix bias. We built better security, fewer mistakes, faster responses, fairer results. Equality isn't a moral luxury. It's an operational advantage." The applause started small and grew. He let it fade before saying, "This isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning of a world where fairness isn't an afterthought, it's the framework." As he stepped down, Patricia caught his arm. "There's someone waiting to speak with you." Near the edge of the garden stood a man in a modest suit, hands clasped awkwardly. His hair was shorter now, his posture uncertain but sincere. It was Cole Turner. He hesitated as David approached. "Mr. Reed," he began, his voice low, "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just needed to say I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't understand what I was doing that night until I lost everything because of it." David studied him quietly. The arrogance was gone. What stood in front of him wasn't the guard who'd mocked him. It was a man who had been forced to see himself. "That takes courage," David said. Have you been working? Cole nodded faintly. Volunteering mostly. At a community program, helping train young guards, trying to make sure they don't make the same mistakes I did. David gestured toward Patricia. Talk to her before you leave. There's a new outreach program under our equality office. You might be useful there. Cole's voice trembled. Thank you. As he walked away, David looked up at the sky. The same sky that had poured rain over him a year ago. Now it was clear, endless, and bright. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the music softened, David stood by the open gate with a small group that included Eli, Patricia, Maya, and Jonas. They watched the lights of the estate shimmer across the lake. Eli broke the silence first. It's strange, he said. This gate used to feel like a line dividing who mattered and who didn't. Now it feels like an invitation. David nodded slowly. That's what gates were meant to be. Protection, not exclusion. Safety, not superiority. He turned to them all. We didn't change the world overnight. But we proved something simple. Systems change when people do. And people change when they're given truth instead of excuses. Patricia smiled. You know, if you ever decide to retire, that's a perfect line for your biography. He laughed softly, shaking his head. I'll leave the speeches to history. For now, I just want to enjoy the view from the place I was once kept out of. They stood together in quiet reflection as the gate glowed softly under its new lights, no longer a barrier but a symbol of what was possible when dignity met determination. When the final guests departed, David lingered alone on the path leading back to the house. The night was still, the air warm. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, not in warning, but in echo, reminding him of the storm that had once defined him and the peace that had followed when he chose not vengeance, but transformation. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man who had overcome injustice. He felt like one who had rewritten its ending, and beyond those gates, the world was listening.